What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. I am so excited about today's episode because in this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 crops where the more you harvest, the more you get. This is a great way to maximize space if you're growing in a small, kind of a small confined space. Maybe it's a patio, maybe it's a balcony or a fire escape, things like that. Or maybe you're just confined to just containers. Maybe you're a beginning gardener and you really want to take advantage of those first couple years of being a beginning gardener, getting hooked into gardening and really seeing the benefit of your garden right off the bat and seeing a return on your investment as soon as possible. These are 2 really important things to take into consideration when growing crops, right? So if you're planting, say, carrots, you plant 1 seed, you get 1 carrot. When you pull it up, it's done. And so if you have a small amount of space, you're not really maximizing that space and using it as efficiently and as effectively as I think most people would agree could be done with things like beans. So beans are one of our crops that we're going to get into, which is the more you harvest, the more you get. Because I always like to talk about exponential harvests. So this is an example of an exponential harvest. The more you harvest, the more will actually give you. And that's because there are certain crops where they'll put their energy into fruit, a set amount of fruit. And when you harvest that set amount of fruit, it actually encourages growth. It encourages the plant to grow bigger and actually produce more fruit. This is a response, and it's actually done to protect the plant's future generation. So if let's say this bean plant produces 10 beans right off the bat. If I leave those 10 beans on, the plant is not encouraged to produce any more beans because its objective is to produce viable seed. Those viable seeds are hopefully going to drop and produce new plants, which are going to continue on the genetic strain of this plant. So what we want to do is we want to pull those beans off. If you harvest crops that fall into the exponential growth category, the plant will actually send a signal back down to the root system to continue growing the root system, and then the root system is directly proportionate to the foliage on top. So when you harvest the beans, it's going to send a signal down to the root system, say, we need more nutrients, we need more growth, increase the root system, increase foliage, and then that foliage obviously will set even more fruit, because if it did not successfully fruit the first time with, say, 10 beans, hopefully giving you 20 beans will kind of guarantee that 1 seed will become viable. And because we're not out in nature, we're actually coming in and harvesting, we can do this very readily by just coming out and picking. Now the beans, if you just left them to their own devices, this would not be an exponential crop. But because we can come in here and literally pick them every time we see them, we can guarantee increased harvest. And as long as we keep the soil fertilized and very conducive for growth, these plants are going to continue producing more and more and more for you. So let's get on into it. I'm going to talk about these 5 now because they're a super benefit to anyone, like I said, that's short on space or even wants to just maximize their food production out of their garden. So like I said, beans are the first one. I already kind of pretty much talked about beans. They give you a first little flush of beans. It's always very small in the very beginning, but you got to pick it. You got to be early. You don't want them to start forming seeds. If you start seeing seeds form, these are our drying beans. So don't do as I say, not as I do. But we're leaving these beans on the plant, meaning you're going to have about 75% less production because these are drying beans. They're soup beans. So these are the midnight black turtle bean, and so they're not yet 100% formed, but you'll see. So you want to pick your beans before they do that, because that right there is a signal that these are mature beans. The plant is going to stop growing, right? If you pick them young, before they, when they're still snap beans, they're still tender, they're still delicious, very immature, you're going to harvest all those off, those 10 beans, and it's going to put on a new set of bunch of flowers and leaves, and that's going to give you maybe 15 or 20 beans the next time around. You harvest all of those, it's going to send another signal, and the plant is going to continue growing and continue producing. So the fastest way to increase your production is to keep harvesting. So now we're here with the second crop, which are peppers. Peppers are another crop that the more you harvest, the more you get. Peppers occur much like beans in flushes, and this is kind of a common trend that you'll see amongst most of these plants. There's a few outliers, but most of these plants, things will occur in flushes. They'll put out a first flush of flowers. That flush of flowers will produce fruit. And once that fruit matures, if you don't pick that fruit, it pretty much will stop sending out more flowers and fruit because it's trying to ripen that fruit and get the seeds mature and viable. So if you pull off the peppers, as soon as they start to turn color, or if you just like green peppers, you're in luck. You're going to pull all those peppers off, and what it's going to do is it's going to send a signal back to the root system. It's going to increase the root system. It's going to increase the flower production and the leaf production. It's going to set even more flowers the second time in a second flush. And here in Michigan, if you regularly pick your peppers, you can get very easily two, sometimes three flushes of fruit. And the third flush is always the biggest. And we always talk about that when we're looking at our growing season, if we're getting our second flush, which we are, most of these peppers are on their second flush now. If we can get our second flush by about the first to second weekend in August, the third flush is going to be ready to be pulled off the plant by right around October. So that's right when our first frost comes. And so it's kind of a timing thing. You got to be quick with it. And sometimes, if we're just waiting on a few peppers to ripen up, we'll pick those knowing full well that if we can pick them to give enough time for that third flush to come on, those 2 peppers we harvest early that might be unripe are going to give way to 30 or 40 peppers. They're going to be ripe come October. So just something we kind of look into, but it's definitely a plant that the more you harvest, the more you get. The third crop that is notorious for its exponential production is zucchini. You leave 1 or 2 zucchinis on the plant for longer than a week and you're going to have zucchinis the size of newborn babies. I mean, they're just absolutely massive. They're baseball bat size. But if you keep harvesting them when they're small, it's going to send the signal to the plant that it's, that fruit is not going to produce viable seeds, and it's going to continue growing and continue producing. Zucchinis grow extremely fast, and so that's why they're notorious for this. They grow faster than any crop in the garden, and they produce faster than any crop in the garden. And so if you can come in there and you can regularly harvest the zucchinis, you're going to have more zucchinis than you know what to do with by the end of the year. This plant back here is one of our largest and best producing plants of all time in the MIgardener garden. We've never had a plant produce as much as this one has. And that's because we've been regularly harvesting, we've been regularly fertilizing when it needs some more fertilizers to keep it growing. We'll give it a little side dress of trifecta. This thing has just kept producing, and it's been an absolute champion of the garden. It has produced over 35 zucchinis from just a single plant. One plant. 35 zucchinis, and it's showing no signs of slowing down. So that is definitely one that I recommend growing, because seriously, the more you harvest, the way more you get. It's definitely a king at doing that. So let's look at the fourth crop now. The fourth crop that falls into this category is leafing herbs. So this is kind of a grouping category. There's a lot that fall into this category, and it's any herb that produces leaves. Now this is a great option to grow for anyone that is tight on space or is looking to save a lot of money, because herbs are some of your most expensive by weight of anything in the garden. And they're also a crop, conveniently, that the more you harvest, the more you get. So they're totally a win-win in my opinion. And they are, like I said, any herb that produces leaves. So I've got sage here, I've got thyme over there, I've got basil over there and over there and over there and over there because I've got basil just about everywhere. And then also things like parsley, oregano, mint, you name it. There's a lot of plants that fall into this category, but it's any herb that produces leaves. The more you harvest, the more you get. Now, if they start to flower, if basil starts to flower, if thyme starts to flower, if sage starts to flower, any of your plants, as soon as they start to flower, you got to clip off the flowers, because the flowering is going to trigger the plant to stop growing and stop producing. It's going to start to turn woody, and then that is when it starts to flower. Once the plant turns woody, it's going to really slow down production. So regularly come in and prune the plant, trim the plant back, and you're going to be benefited by not only having a lot of herbs put up in storage and ready to dry or ready to use in your cooking, but it's also going to give you twice as many herbs the next time around, because what they'll do is they'll actually fork. They'll form little side shoots, and those side shoots will then produce more leaves, and those will continue to grow, and you'll clip those back and they'll fork again. This is this kind of exponential growth where one main stem turns into two turns into 4 or 5, and 5 turns into 10 or even 15 different side shoots and side branches that all grow. And so that's where you have one little spindly basil plant, but if you chop that thing in half, by the end of the month, it'll look like a bush if you keep regularly pruning it back. So leafing herbs are probably some of the most productive crops in the entire garden if you look at just the sheer amount that they produce for the sheer amount of for the lack of space they take up. It's pretty incredible, and it's something that I recommend anyone try growing, because they are definitely a crop where the more you harvest, the more you get. The fifth crop, where the more you harvest, the more you get, is cucumbers. I love cucumbers for this because it's a plant where you can grow pretty much one as long as you keep it healthy. It's a lot like zucchini, where it just keeps producing and producing and producing because it encourages more vine growth, and the more vine growth you have, the more cucumbers you're going to get. And so if you accidentally leave your cucumbers on the vine, like I accidentally did here, they turn all yellow and gnarly. The production drops dramatically, as in like 75 to 80% reduction in production. That wasn't supposed to rhyme, but it sounded kind of cool. So you have about an 80% reduction in production if you leave your cucumbers on the vine. You know, once they start to produce fruit and one starts ripening, the plant pretty much just slows down production entirely. So it's a lot like zucchini, like I said, where you got to stay up on it, you got to harvest, and if you do it regularly, you're going to get a lot more out of it. So this plant back here is pretty much done for. Like I said, I accidentally left this one on. I just didn't even see the fruit, and that's actually what prompted this video, because we were noticing that our cucumbers were dropping dramatically in production, and you could tell by the end of the vines, they weren't producing anything. I thought, okay, well, I'm fertilizing, the plants look really healthy, why am I not getting any fruit? So I kind of just went on a mission to find out what the problem was, and that's when I found this underneath a couple leaves deep down inside here that I had obviously missed. And that is exactly why, all along this plant, there had not been any fruit production in like 2 weeks. And it's because this thing had been sitting on there for like 2 weeks. So keep harvesting, and you're gonna really benefit, and you're gonna reap the rewards of harvesting because they're gonna keep giving you more. So that is the 5 crops that I have for you. Now you might be wondering, Luke, where are tomatoes? Do tomatoes fall in this category? And they don't actually. Tomatoes do not stop producing. They are a vine, and vining crops like tomatoes don't stop producing even when the fruit starts ripening. This is why it did not fall into this category. It's still a great crop to grow, and you can still get a lot of tomatoes, but the more you harvest does not mean the more you're going to get, especially when it comes to an indeterminate tomato. You can leave those tomatoes on literally until they fall off the plant, and it'll just keep producing more tomatoes the higher up it goes, because they'll produce all season long regardless. And that's the difference between a perpetual harvest like tomatoes and an exponential harvest like cucumbers or any of the other 5 crops that I mentioned. So there's a little bit of a difference, and maybe we'll do that. If you want me to do a video on crops that are perpetual harvesters, let me know in the comments box below, or if this video gets over 1,000 likes, I'll make that video because I want to make sure you guys want it. But yeah, I think it'd be important to cover. But like I said, let me know in the comments box below. Do you want a video on perpetual harvest versus exponential harvest? So, all right, I'll catch you guys later on tomorrow's episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something new. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. And we'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.